Tonight on Fox 45 News, the mayor prepares to announce the recommendations from Baltimore's Squeegee Collaborative.
No one thinks that young people can grow up to be professional squeegee people.
What Fox 45 News has learned about payments and self-policing before tomorrow's big reveal. Vote 2022, the new leadership coming to the state, how Baltimore City residents mobilize to hold elected leaders accountable, and the races still too close to call. A former Baltimore County educator comes forward to Fox 45 News Project Baltimore. Their message on student violence and how it led to the educator leaving the profession.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 10.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary Bubala.
And I'm Kai Jackson. Mayor Brandon Scott will release his Squeegee Collaborative report during a news conference tomorrow, nearly 4 months after it was formed.
In that time, we have heard about several heated interactions between squeegee kids and drivers, including some squeegee kids damaging cars, assaulting drivers, stealing money, and sometimes carrying guns.
Now, few details of the report have been released, including a recommendation to give guaranteed income to squeegee kids.
Keith Daniels joins us live with more on what to expect from all of this tomorrow. Keith?
Well, Mary and Kai, in recent months, the mayor brought together police, business leaders, community members, and squeegee kids themselves to come up with a plan to deal with this issue. And tonight, we're just hours away from the results of that collaborative. Tonight, word from Baltimore City Hall. Mayor Brandon Scott is set to officially roll out his long-awaited Squeegee Collaborative plan at a news conference tomorrow. Last week, a few details of the plan trickled from the mayor's office, which includes self-policing by the squeegee kids and some kind of guaranteed income program to discourage the practice. That part of the plan,
being paid to stay off the corner, is not going to work.
Resonating with some motorists as the debate over squeegee kids intensified last week with the leaks from parts of the preliminary plan.
We're going to pay them to get off of the corner, but we got people out here working every day, and we get money funded to the city all the time, but this is what we're going to waste it on.
But law enforcement expert Tyrone Powers believes that part of the plan could be key.
No one thinks that young people can grow up to be professional squeegee people. There's no job and career in squeegeeing long term.
Powers taking a more wait-and-see attitude towards the plan before condemning it.
If somehow they were getting paid and you were linking that to skills like welding, like infrastructure, things that they could use long term.
Young men have been washing windows for tips at Baltimore street corners for decades. Opponents call them a nuisance that must be removed from the streets, while supporters say the boys are simply working to make an honest dollar, needing help, not punishment. Well, for now, it's unclear whether all of the leaked parts of the plan, the preliminary plan, will remain in the final draft. We're live tonight. Keith Daniels, Fox 45 News.
Keith, thank you. City State's Attorney-elect Ivan Bates told Fox 45 he's keeping an eye on the Squeegee Collaborative recommendations. Mayor Brandon Scott has said he will not use existing laws to get squeegee kids out of city intersections, saying what they're doing is panhandling, which the mayor says is protected by the First Amendment. Now, last month, Bates told Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost he disagrees with the mayor on his interpretation of the law. He said he's waiting to see the results of the collaborative before moving forward. Fox 45 News has been covering the squeegee kid issue for months, and we'll have complete coverage of the collaborative report as soon as it's released. You can watch the mayor's announcement live on our website, foxbaltimore.com, starting at 1:30. Then stay tuned for Fox 45 News at 4 o'clock for analysis and reaction.
Turning now to your Vote 2022 coverage. An historic election ends with Maryland's first black governor and attorney general and first female comptroller. It also gives Democrats control of all statewide offices for the first time in 8 years. Now, here in Baltimore City, voters overwhelmingly chose independence and accountability for elected leaders. Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost explains what it means and has reaction from the mayor.
From a truly independent watchdog to implementing term limits for some elected leaders, Baltimore City voters made their voices very clear on Election Day. And now it appears as if some city council members are poised to make it easier for them to earn a pension.
Good morning, good morning.
Baltimore City voters turning out to the polls, casting their ballots for independence.
I is for Independent Advisory Board.
Question I, creating a truly independent oversight board of the city's inspector general, the watchdog, rooting out waste, fraud, and corruption in the halls of city government.
If you want a strong inspector general, if you want a strong watchdog for the city, they have to be independent.
Instead of politicians overseeing the IG, the board will be made up of people from across Baltimore, passing with 86% of the vote, and ballots are still being counted.
This is a really exciting time in Baltimore City for independence.
David Williams, taxpayer protection advocate, says all eyes are on Baltimore, and this time it's a good thing.
Right now, Baltimore City is the envy of the country.
In the final days leading up to the election, Council President Nick Mosby changing the rules of the game, introducing a bill changing the city's pension requirements, making elected leaders eligible for a payout after 8 years in office instead of 12. While the city's first responders must work 25 years to become eligible for a pension. The council president tying the bill to question K, implementing term limits for the leaders.
As council members, as elected officials, if the citizens of Baltimore vote that they don't want you to be in office for 16 or 20 or 24 years, I think it is prudent of us to be in alignment with where the motivation of the city is.
Voters overwhelmingly telling Baltimore City electeds they don't want them serving more than 2 terms in the same office. Question K, passing with 72% of the vote. And because the council fast-tracked their pension plan in about 3 weeks, the entire council now poised to pass the bill.
This is the most self-serving piece of legislation that I have seen.
Fox 45 News asking some of the members who supported the bill just this week, why?
I work hard in the city for my constituents.
Councilman Robert Stokes not shy about his desire to draw a pension.
I bring money to my constituents. Only job I have.
Stokes' claim remains in question. Fox 45 News finding a slew of bills and resolutions with Stokes' name attached, mostly as a co-sponsor, and the majority of the bills, oversight hearings. Stokes is the same councilman who called an investigative hearing into ghost student and grade-changing news uncovered by Fox 45's Project Baltimore, only not to ask city schools about it.
Why not you ask the hard question?
Because I'm setting the tone. My tone is to be able to talk about school performance.
Stokes also refusing to attend Fox 45's town hall held in his district, talking about crime, which was one of the most dangerous council districts in all of Baltimore. And now, if approved by the council, he will earn a pension. Right now, Stokes earns nearly $74,000 a year. We sent him a couple of questions via email Wednesday, asking, what bills have you sponsored and gotten adopted that impact your constituents directly? What money are you referring to when you say you, quote, bring money to your constituents? The councilman ignoring the questions, refusing to provide more details. Meanwhile, Mayor Brandon Scott issuing a lengthy statement about Election Day, but he doesn't mention Question K and term limits set to become reality. Fox 45 News, though, catching up with the mayor in South Baltimore.
Listen, I supported term limits and voted term limits twice. So for me, we know that the voters have spoken. I wish we would have made that decision to have term limits 4 years ago and before that, when I voted on it before that, and now we just have to make sure that all the other regulations fall in line with it.
Mayor Brandon Scott says he hasn't had time to look at the pension plan, so it's unclear if he will sign it. It's unclear when that pension plan will be up for a third reader vote inside City Hall, but it's clear Baltimore City voters want to send a message to their elected leaders, saying that they want accountability, transparency, and independence from their elected leaders. In Baltimore, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
We want to know what you think. Should elected city leaders give themselves pensions after 8 years instead of the current 12 years? So far, 91% of you say keep it at 12 years. Go to foxbaltimore.com, click on the Pulse tab to cast your vote.
Stay with Fox 45 News. Our election coverage will continue throughout the night. At 10:30, we'll take a closer look at the next steps for recreational marijuana now that voters have decided to legalize it. And we'll look at the balance of power in Maryland and in Washington, D.C. At 10:45, we hear from Governor-elect Wes Moore about his plans to deal with crime in Baltimore.
Well, new tonight, Baltimore City police are sharing some pictures of a man they are trying to identify in the shooting of a 13-year-old girl Monday night. It happened just blocks from Hopkins Hospital along Fayette Street in East Baltimore. Tonight, the girl is still fighting for her life as police search for this man. Take a good look. Mayor Brandon Scott says he spoke with the mother who's desperate for somebody to come forward.
Someone has to grow the fortitude and do the right thing on behalf of this mom and this baby in our community.
Take another look at the pictures. We have posted them on our website. You can go there, foxbaltimore.com, so you can share the pictures to help detectives.
City Council member Odette Ramos and Antonio Glover hosted a virtual town hall tonight to ask questions about the memorandum of understanding between the Johns Hopkins Police Department and the Baltimore City Police. The university restarted work to create a private police force earlier this year after it was paused in 2020. Residents spoke at the town hall.
I am very disappointed with Johns Hopkins' approach to the initiation and pending implementation of the JHPD. It has been far from transparent.
Multiplying the sheer number of special police departments in a city like Baltimore makes it much harder for residents and local representatives, to achieve meaningful police accountability.
Well, tonight's meeting comes after Johns Hopkins University's own town halls resulted in protests. Those in favor of the department say they believe it will make campus safer. Last week, Johns Hopkins University issued a warning to students and staff at its Homewood and Peabody campuses about an increase in serious crime, including armed robberies. The university outlined steps being taken to address the issue and mentioned the upcoming launch of its police department. You can find more on the Johns Hopkins Police Department on our website, foxbaltimore.com.
Hurricane Nicole making a push toward Florida, a Category 1 hurricane, the first hurricane likely in November to hit the United States in 37 years. The last one, Kate, back in 1985. And we await the new updates minute by minute from the National Hurricane Center, one just coming out 11 minutes ago. We're going to wait those updates as we work through the next hour to hour and a half as this edges closer and closer to the Florida coastline. Hurricane warnings are out. Looks like it impacts the Palm Beaches all the way up to about Orlando. And we could see up to an inch or two of rain out of it as well as it makes a move northbound. There could be other impacts as well here towards the end of the week. We're timing out everything hour by hour coming up in just minutes.
Still ahead on Fox 45 News at 10 o'clock tonight, a former Baltimore County educator speaks to Project Baltimore, the urgent message about school violence and how it impacted that person's decision to leave the profession. Marylanders vote to legalize recreational marijuana. Fox 45 News breaks down what still needs to happen before sales can begin. And the race for Anne Arundel County Executive too close to call, despite more than 10,000 vote gap. When those mail-in ballots will be opened and how many more there are to count, all coming up at 10:30.
Tonight, a former Baltimore County educator comes forward with a strong message to school leaders. Get student violence under control.
As Project Baltimore's Chris Papps explains, this former educator says the violence took such a toll on their health, it forced this educator to leave the profession.
Before the incident, what was your life like?
I had friends. I was happy. I socialized. I was thriving.
And now?
I just feel like a shell of myself. I'm just kind of existing.
This former Baltimore County school administrator does not want to be identified due to mental health treatment stemming from an incident at their former job.
After this interview, after I talk about it today, I'm ready to no longer discuss it unless absolutely necessary.
20 years in public education, and it all fell apart in 20 seconds.
That short period of time ended a career that I loved.
Project Baltimore blurred this school fight video to protect the identity of minors involved. But when it broke out a few years ago, this educator tried to stop it and was pulled to the ground by a student who came up from behind.
I remember just feeling the jerk. Yes, that was the catalyst.
As the physical wounds were treated, mental ones emerged. Though the educator had seen fights and intervened in violence before, this time was different. The student had approached from behind, creating a fear of the unknown that began to creep into everyday life.
I'm always afraid of things. I find myself withdrawn from friends, and so I just stayed in this constant fight-flight state of mind.
The symptoms all pointed to one thing: post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Have you seen an increase in educators coming to you?
Yes.
Faith Attabule is a therapist who's treated many educators, including the one who spoke with Project Baltimore.
Not only is there an increase in people reaching out for help, there's also people changing careers, quitting their jobs or changing just environments altogether.
Attabule says school violence is getting worse, and it makes sense. She says the COVID shutdowns slowed the emotional development of many children as they isolated at home. Once students returned to school, Attabule says many children lost the ability to handle situations rationally, which has resulted in more fights. At the same time, schools have changed the way they deal with violent students, and educators are dealing with the fallout. The National Education Association, the country's largest teachers union, surveyed its members in January on key issues causing teachers to leave the job. 76% of educators said student behavioral issues are a serious problem.
Over time, the system has just, rather than dealt with it, they just kind of either moved on or just adjusted as much as they can to make it now almost a norm.
Punched, kicked, thrown bottles at me.
Project Baltimore over the years has interviewed other educators who were exposed to school violence, developed PTSD, and received a disability retirement. Baltimore City teachers like Scott Miller Phoenix, and this Baltimore County teacher who asked not to be identified.
I would come home exhausted just from having 3 and 4 panic attacks a day.
But it's not just teachers and educators who face long-term consequences from the violence.
We are at a crisis here.
Those most affected, many would argue, are those committing the violence. Ryan Coleman, the president of the Randallstown chapter of the NAACP, has recently called on Baltimore County schools to issue long-term suspensions to violent students to send a message that this behavior is not acceptable.
This is really the school to prison pipeline here, okay? We're not showing our children what proper behavior is. And so they leave school thinking it's okay to hit a person.
So I think sometimes we have policies that protect the perpetrators more than the people who are attacked.
The educator we interviewed has since been granted a disability retirement, but still thinks about that day and the student who caused the injuries and faced no consequences. Fox 45 is not identifying the student because he was a minor, but we looked him up on online court records. In 2018, a couple years after this fight, that student was arrested in Woodlawn and charged with second-degree assault. He spent nearly 2 weeks in jail. At the time, he was 18 years old.
I think people take for granted how violence in schools can impact individuals. Kids get hurt too, adults get hurt. It's not something to be taken lightly.
I'm Chris Pabst, and this is Project Baltimore.
The NAACP is pressing for answers in a recent Baltimore City police shooting, what they want to know and how the commissioner is responding.
Baltimore City Council is pressing DPW for some answers about when it will resume regular recycling pickup. What the department says is the reason for the delay and the harsh words from one city councilman.
And tracking our Hurricane Nicole, as it makes its move toward Florida and up the East Coast. Let's go ahead and take a look at the future scan. It appears that the moisture, yes, it moves our way, and it could be getting here as early as a Friday morning commute. And then things could get real messy during the day on Friday, and maybe even lasting into Saturday. I'll let you know we could have some severe weather around here. We're tracking it minute by minute. All the details coming up in a couple of minutes.
City council members are demanding answers from the Department of Public Works about when it will return to weekly recycling pickup. DPW cut back services in January, saying it was because of COVID-fueled staffing shortages. Well, DPW now says it is down 700 employees, many of them commercial drivers. Online job postings suggest the city is offering between $40,000 and $50,000 for the position. A search of salary.com shows that's on the low end. The average salary of CDL drivers in Maryland is closer to $60,000. DPW Director Jason Mitchell says they are working to provide better pay.
We're working with HR on potentially salary survey so we can assess our pay compared to the industry, as well as bonuses is something that we're looking at.
But what we're seeing is that the money is going to people in the executive and higher level positions are making way more than they need to be making. And the workers who are actually physically doing the work are being underpaid.
The Department of Public Works is operating with a budget more than $600 million. Director Mitchell himself makes $245,000 a year. Today's hearing is the latest the City Council has had with DPW recently. It held 2 hearings following the E. coli water contamination in September.
The NAACP is questioning whether the Baltimore police officer who shot and killed Tyree Moorhead, the creator of no-shoot zones in the city, used excessive force. Just yesterday, BPD released body-worn camera footage of the shooting that happened Sunday in West Baltimore.
Get down! Signal 13, get down! Get down!
Investigators say the video shows Moorhead laying on top of a woman and armed with a large knife. The video captures the officer firing a total of 14 rounds, some of those shots after Moorhead rolled away from the woman, but still clutching the knife. Fox 45 News questioned the police commissioner about the use of force.
Are those gunshots justified, and please explain?
That will, it would be inappropriate for me to answer that before the conclusion of the investigation. That's why we have an investigation.
The NAACP is asking several questions about the body cam video, including whether this is a case of excessive force and what changes to training BPD needs to put in place as a result of the incident. The commissioner has not publicly responded to those questions.
Marylanders have decided to legalize recreational marijuana. What comes next? What you should expect to see before it goes into effect in the summer.
I'm hoping the Lord will bring her home safe.
A Baltimore family frantic tonight. Their 75-year-old sister has been missing for weeks. Why they suspect foul play. Your Vote 2022 coverage continues right now at 10:30.
That's right. Maryland is in the national spotlight right now. Voters have elected Democrat Wes Moore for governor. He will become the first black chief executive in state history.
This is just more proof that progress is not inevitable, but progress is possible in the state of Maryland. And I am truly humbled to be part of this legacy.
Well, also making history, Anthony Brown will be the first black attorney general in Maryland, and Brooke Learman will be the first woman to hold the state comptroller's office.
Now, with those wins, the state is now headed toward one-party rule.
We have live team coverage. Mackenzie Frost pressed Wes Moore about his crime plan, and we'll hear from her coming up at 10:45.
Sinclair National correspondent Scott Thuman is looking into the balance of power in Washington, D.C., and Maxine Stryker has Maryland's one-party rule.
But we begin with Riel Creighton. She joins us live with what comes next when it comes to recreational marijuana now that voters decided to legalize it in Maryland. Riel?
And Mary, that is the big question for some. When can you smoke legally? And when does the massive infrastructure that will be needed to support all of this begin?
Sometimes you don't even have to actually get close to it. It's just the aroma.
At Ben and Picari's Hamden dispensary, Elevated Wellness.
It's so mesmerizing to me.
They've been waiting for this.
It's going to be a huge positive impact.
Maryland voters Tuesday overwhelmingly said yes to question 4 on the ballot, riding the wave of a growing list of states to approve recreational marijuana use. The law officially hits the system on July 1 of 2023, allowing adults 21 and older to possess, smoke, and grow the herb, with restrictions on possession of over 1.5 ounces.
2 streams of revenue. One is for the licenses that the state is going to sell and process, but also just the sale of marijuana.
David Williams with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance calls it a win-win for everyone, but especially Maryland taxpayers who he says will see a cash injection and maybe even crime reduction as weed goes mainstream.
If you look at a state like Colorado that has basically the same population as Maryland, they're bringing in $400 million a year in tax revenue from the sales of marijuana products. So this really could be a opportunity for Maryland to raise money without raising taxes.
What comes next is lawmakers who will have to establish its regulation, taxing, and licenses for retail to begin, expected when the General Assembly meets in January.
There's no difference between hemp-derived Delta-9 THC or, cannabis Delta-9 THC.
Meantime, all varieties of hemp-based THC, what Picari sells right now, is legal. But he opened his business in anticipation that very soon he'd be expanding. First priority, he wants to educate newcomers on how to consume. But he sees booming business in the year to come.
This is going to be a nice journey for everybody.
For most, except for those with a medical marijuana card, you can't start smoking just yet. Meantime, the lawmakers did pass a companion bill earlier this year to expunge the records of those where marijuana possession was their only charge. Reporting live in Baltimore tonight, Riel Creighton, Fox 45 News.
Riel, thank you. In key local races, Democratic county executive was largely able to fend off Republican challenges. In Baltimore County, Democrat incumbent Johnny Olszewski beat Republican Pat McDonough. In Howard County, Democrat Calvin Ball beat former county executive Alan Killerman, who was trying to seek the office again. And in Anne Arundel County, voters are still waiting for results there. Stuart Pittman trails by more than 10,000 votes. The County Board of Elections says more than 45,000 mail-in ballots were turned in.
It's exactly what we expected would happen, that we would be down on Election Day when these results came out, and that we would have to wait until they counted the mail-in votes.
Well, state data shows an overwhelming majority of the mail-in ballots were returned by registered Democrats. The Board of Elections says it will start counting mail-in ballots tomorrow morning. Ballot counting will not take place on Friday because of the Veterans Day holiday. That means we likely won't know who won until next week. Democratic wins at the highest levels of state government means Maryland will soon be under one-party control. Fox 45's Maxine Stryker continues our team coverage with what that means.
Well, Democrats swept the state, and one political expert says that Republicans will now need to figure out how not to be rendered useless in Annapolis.
The tide is changing in Annapolis with the election of a new governor, Democrat Wes Moore.
Thank you, Maryland!
And other Democrats also won big last night. Brooke Learman was victorious in the race for comptroller.
We elect people, not parties. And we elected people last night who have big ideas about how we can be bold and how we can do better for Maryland families, communities.
And Anthony Brown will be the state's next attorney general, leaving Republicans outnumbered nearly 2-1.
But it is clear, y'all gave us a mandate. And that mandate is for a vision for a healthier and a wealthier Maryland.
I think when he said mandate, he meant Democrats won this state big. They held their legislative offices. There was no really big upsets at all. That basically there's the mandate that governed that basically says we are the party in charge.
Political analyst John Deedy says with Democrats sweeping the state, Annapolis is now under one-party rule.
There was a lot of things Democrats wanted to do over the last 8 years they couldn't do because Governor Hogan opposed those things. Now, I think a lot of those things are going to be on the fast track. You're going to see a Dagwood sandwich of legislation in this coming session.
But what will this mean for Republicans, seemingly fighting an uphill battle without Governor Hogan at the helm?
Republicans are going to have to pick the right spots for the right things. And, they can go after some of the fiscal issues. But when Democrats argue there's going to be a lot of money there, they're going to have to basically pick certain areas where they think they can get not as much a win, but to get the policy tweaked enough to improve it, to show, look, there may be a one party in Annapolis, but we are here to critique and make suggestions and make these ideas better when we know we can't stop them.
So excited for a new governor.
Senate President Bill Ferguson says just because there will be one-party rule doesn't mean the halls will always be harmonious.
Of course, there's a number of things that Democrats disagree with each other on. And so, the legislative process is built to take into account lots of different perspectives, and I'm confident that we're going to be able to do great work on behalf of Marylanders.
Last time the state was under one-party rule was 8 years ago under Governor Martin O'Malley, but different this time, Deedy says, is the state has a nearly $2 billion surplus in revenue. In Baltimore, Maxine Stryker, Fox 45 News.
We'd like to know what you think. Are you concerned about one-party rule in Maryland? It's something we saw in 2015. So far, 95% of those who responded say yes. Head to foxbaltimore.com/vote to weigh in.
Well, the balance of power in Congress is still to be determined. TBD, as they say. In the House, there are still several races that are too close to call. Republicans hold an advantage right now with 207 seats to Democrats' 184. And there are still 44 seats up for grabs. Now, the Senate will be too close to call at this point, so let's take a look at that. There we go. Made that work. The parties are tied right now with 48 seats each. As America waits to find out who will control Congress, President Biden, he's weighing in a speech this afternoon. Sinclair Chief Political Correspondent Scott Thuman has reaction.
Well, the ballots still being counted in some states, but the impact already being felt. President Biden on Wednesday wasting no time in saying even if Republicans take some control, he won't do anything differently.
This is supposed to be a red wave. You were talking about us losing 30 to 50 seats, and this was going to, that's not going to happen. The Democrats had a strong night, and we lost fewer seats in the House of Representatives than any Democratic president's first midterm election in the last 40 years.
An emboldened President Biden calling the results so far proof that he and his party's policies are what Americans want, and saying he'll do whatever necessary to block any GOP attempts in Congress to weaken Medicaid and Medicare or pass a nationwide ban on abortion. Republicans acknowledging it wasn't the night they wanted, but also not over, where Senate control could come down to a runoff in Georgia. Former President Trump on social media writing, while in certain ways yesterday's election was somewhat disappointing, from my personal standpoint, it is a very big victory.
We didn't lose a single Republican governorship, and the wave did happen because we are waving goodbye to Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
If Republicans control the House, Biden says he'll work across the aisle, but won't change a thing in how he leads, nor let the elections determine if he'll try to extend that in 2024. As former President Trump may announce, as early as next week.
Our intention is to run again. That's been our intention, regardless of what the outcome of this election was. The fact that we won is one that gives everybody like, whew, sigh of relief.
Biden also saying he plans to pursue his inaugural promise to unite the country, a promise critics argue he's broken, and one that a likely divided government will make even more difficult to fulfill. In Washington, I'm Scott Thuman.
A former Baltimore City police officer charged with sexually abusing children at an Owings Mills daycare center is now accused of assaulting 2 more children. That's according to the Baltimore County State's Attorney's Office. James Weems was first charged with abusing 2 children back in July after police say his wife shot him at a Washington, D.C. hotel. Authorities say she shot him after she learned of allegations he abused at least 3 children at the daycare she owned. The Baltimore County State's Attorney's Office says the 4 victims are between the ages of 8 and 11 years old.
New tonight, a Baltimore City family is frantic. Their 75-year-old sister has been missing for weeks, and police are calling the woman a vulnerable missing person. Fox 45's Keith Daniels spoke with the family about why they think she didn't just walk away.
But Tia Brown is waiting for it to be over. The nightmare.
It's rough.
Her 75-year-old sister is missing.
Fearing for the worst, because it's been almost 3 weeks and nobody has talked to or seen her. And I mean, we got a close-knit sisters and cousins and sister-in-laws and stuff like that, so she wouldn't go nowhere like unless somebody know.
Police are searching for Versi Spell. Investigators say Spell, who suffers from lupus and polio and uses a cane to help her walk, vanished from her upstairs apartment at a home on Barrington Road near Carsdale Avenue, October 19th.
We've looked in the garages in our own homes to see if we can, see if maybe she fell in our empty cars. No one knows where she is.
Brown says she last saw her sister October 14th after taking her to a doctor's appointment. She believes her sister is the victim of foul play.
Her cane was in the hallway, in the foyer, in a chair. So she have nothing to walk with. They found her keys in the basement, and my niece found her glasses outside on the grass near the steps.
Brown says after learning no one had heard from Miss Spell, she went to her sister's home, discovered the home was broken into, a television stolen. Police are not confirming or denying any specific details, only saying the investigation is ongoing. Meanwhile, Brown waits for her sister's return.
I have hope. I'm hoping the Lord will bring her home safe. But if not, just bring her home no matter what state she's in so we can have closure.
In Baltimore, Keith Daniels, Fox 45 News.
If you have any information about this case, you are asked to call Baltimore police. You can remain anonymous by calling Metro Crime Stoppers at 1-866-7-LOCK-UP.
Well, Fox 45 News pressing Governor-elect Wes Moore about his plan to deal with crime in Baltimore, how it differs from the plan city leaders have. M&T Bank Stadium looks a little different tonight. Coming up on the late edition, why several of Maryland's famous sites are bathing in green light this week.
All right, the big news is Nicole. Now, we've got a pretty calm weather pattern here. It's going to be chilly again tomorrow morning, but what we really look forward to, or maybe not so much look forward to, is Nicole's Maryland impact. That's right, it's a hurricane now. We'll get into that in a second. But Friday into early Saturday, it looks like that's when our best chance of rain is with this. There's even a low-end severe risk. Could be an inch or two of rain and maybe even some gusty breezes, 20 to 35 miles an hour or so. Right now, Nicole is a Category 1 hurricane, and it looks like it's slated to be the first November U.S. landfalling hurricane since 1985 when Kate made landfall on the Gulf Coast of Florida around Mexico Beach. You see here we've got tropical storm warnings and storm surge warnings, hurricane warnings all up and down the east coast of Florida, and all of this is pushing its way inland now. So it's just a matter of time overnight until this finally does make landfall. For now, pretty nice around here, but there's our storm going to move north ahead of this next weather maker, a cold front that's out to the west. It looks like it makes landfall tonight into early tomorrow as a Category 1. Then it makes that big hard turn as it interacts with the cold front. And then the big rains fall, but it's going to be just north and west of us as this thing is probably going to be a remnant moving up the Appalachians. Now, we could still see about a half inch to an inch and a half of rain in spots, but we have been running dry. So that's the good news. We can take some rain. We also have the potential of a level 1 of 5 or a marginal risk of severe weather. It could be an outside chance of a spin-up tornado or some damaging winds. That also not out of the question. Now it's 44, clear skies still in that autumnal feel. Now behind all this, it gets super cold. Look at these temperatures, 10 to 25 degrees above zero. That's it. Over portions of the upper Midwest and the Intermountain West. Won't get that cold around here, but it is going to get quite chilly behind this thing. So overnight tonight into tomorrow, another dry day. It looks like we'll start chilly. High temperatures getting likely into the 60s. That's my thoughts. And there's your rain into Friday on and off. Some of those yellows, oranges, and reds. That could be some of those stronger storms. That lasts into Friday night. Passes out of here on Saturday with a spot shower. And look at that big chill behind this into next week.
Well, a major first for Maryland. Wes Moore will be the state's first black governor. He beat Republican Dan Cox, who conceded the race today. And today, Moore outlined his top priorities.
If people don't feel safe, they're not going to stay and they're not going to come. So it is the #1 priority that we've got to drill in and we've got to focus on.
Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost spoke with Moore about his plan to tackle crime.
After clinching the election, Governor-elect Wes Moore not wasting time talking about what he wants to do to tackle an issue, one that Baltimore City knows all too well.
We've got to prioritize keeping our community safe. And I need for the city of Baltimore to understand that in the state of Maryland, you're going to have a partner in order to make that happen.
The first thing that you talked about when you were looking at the administration was crime and public safety.
Yes.
And obviously in Baltimore, that is something that weighs heavily on the minds of voters. How do you plan to move that forward? And what do you think are some of the first priorities in that realm of public safety that you think you can get done?
If you don't get public safety right, nothing else is going to work. That means that we are going to work in partnership with local jurisdictions, with local leaders, working in partnership with our new state's attorney, because we've got to make sure we are getting and keeping violent offenders off of our streets.
Moore looking to work with incoming state's attorney Ivan Bates, who ran on a tougher on crime platform, ending incumbent state's attorney Marilyn Mosby's tenure and her attempt at a third term. One of the priorities for the current administration in Annapolis was the violent firearms offender bill. It didn't get through the General Assembly, targeting those repeat violent offenders. Is that something that you would look at again coming up for this next session?
It is something we are going to look at because we've got to prioritize not just getting these firearms and illegal guns off of our streets. It's also about going after the people who continue to bring them into communities. The people who continue to serve as violent offenders, repeated violent offenders.
A different tune than the Baltimore City Mayor, Brandon Scott, who never came out in support of Hogan's plan.
And it's also, for me, also about focusing on what we can do right now. And that's why we're pushing our Criminal Justice Coordinating Council.
With the legislative session poised to begin before Moore is sworn in, he says he understands the importance of getting the policy right so Baltimore City can see a new reality.
You look at the closure rate. When a homicide happens in the city of Baltimore, there's a 41% closure rate. That means if I commit a homicide in Baltimore, I've got a better chance of getting away with it than actually getting captured, tried, caught, and convicted for it. And we've got to move aggressively to be able to make sure that people can and should feel safe in the place they call home.
Meanwhile, Mayor Scott continues touting his holistic approach to curbing violence. Despite the rhetoric, the number of people's lives forever impacted by gun violence continues to climb. Moore says without addressing the problems facing Baltimore right now, the entire state will suffer.
I have campaigned very aggressively over the past year and a half all around the state, and I'm saying the same thing everywhere. You cannot have a thriving Maryland if you do not have a thriving Baltimore, period.
Governor Larry Hogan and Wes Moore will be meeting to talk about that transition in Annapolis on Thursday, and then the two are expected to answer some questions. So we could learn a little bit more about what that process will look like. In Baltimore, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
Well, want to feel old? Gen Z is making its way to Congress. Ahead on the late edition, how America's youngest representative plans to earn his respect in Washington. And Houston, other teams have a problem. How one Ravens linebacker is turning back the clock in his 12th year in the league. That's ahead on Sports Unlimited.
Justin Houston's been at it for a long time and has a pretty solid resume. First-team All-Pro, four-time Pro Bowler, and tied for the most safeties not only in a single season, but all time. Now 33 years old, Houston can add another AFC Defensive Player of the Week to his list of accolades. Seemed as though his best years were behind him, right? It's like Houston thought so as well because he was getting ready to retire in the offseason, he says, but clearly he still got it. The Orioles made a few roster moves this afternoon as Major League Baseball's offseason heats up. The big one, the team declined Jordan Lyles' $11 million option for 2023, meaning the 32-year-old pitcher will become a free agent. But that doesn't necessarily mean he won't be back in Baltimore next season. The team also claimed outfielder Daz Cameron off waivers. The O's now have 34 players on that 40-man roster. The next wave of Terps have put the pen to paper, making their decisions to play ball for Kevin Willard official. One of those signees hails from right here in Baltimore. St. Francis Academy's Jonathan Lamoth is headed to College Park. He's a number 3 player in the entire state, so you can say he's pretty good at basketball, right? Willard signed 2 other DMV guys as well, bringing in Deshaun Harris-Smith and Jamie Kaiser. Maryland, they're back in action tomorrow night against Western Carolina. Should be a good one. Coming up, we'll take a look at Brenda Freese's recruiting class as the Terps women's basketball team gets set for the showdown with SC. Plus, a possible Trey Mancini reunion. That and more when Sports Unlimited returns.
Rocco, thank you. Ahead on the late edition, the Squeegee Collaborative is set to release its findings, when the formal plan will be announced and what could be included. Well, the Ravens are saying thanks to veterans all month, bringing support for American Humane Pups for Patriots.
American Humane provides highly trained service dogs to veterans with suffering from PTS or traumatic brain injury. And we are enabling them to really reintegrate in their communities with their families. And the dogs are given to them at no cost to the veterans.
At the Wegmans in Owings Mills, Kenyon Drake and Ronnie Stanley were joined by 2 veterans who had been paired with training rescued dogs. Stanley's foundation also helps train dogs, and Drake has a sister in service, so it was a cause close to both of them.
Baltimore Squeegee Collaborative set to be announced tomorrow. What Fox 45 News has learned about the plans. An historic election night in Maryland. Fox 45 News takes you through a night of firsts as some results are still up in the air.
And Nicole set to make the first U.S. November landfall of a hurricane in 37 years on the Florida coast tonight, and it could have impacts here. I'm going to let you know what we're going to see and when. We're going to time it out hour by hour on my Weather Authority forecast.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News Late Edition.
When I release this Squeegee Collaborative is when I go talk about the Squeegee Collaborative. And we're going to do that for you guys very soon.
Well, Mayor Brandon Scott is promising answers on the Squeegee Collaborative, and it appears those answers are coming tomorrow afternoon. Good evening, I'm Kai Jackson. After months of meetings, the Squeegee Collaborative is preparing to release a comprehensive plan. Keith Daniels leads us off with the remaining questions.
Well, in recent months, the mayor brought together police, business leaders, community members, and the Squeegee kids themselves to come up with a plan to deal with this issue. And tonight, we're just minutes away from the results of that collaborative. Tonight, word from Baltimore City Hall. Mayor Brandon Scott is set to officially roll out his long-awaited Squeegee Collaborative plan at a news conference tomorrow. Last week, a few details of the plan trickled from the mayor's office, which includes self-policing by the Squeegee kids and some kind of guaranteed income program to discourage the practice. That part of the plan,
being paid to stay off the corner, is not going to work.
Resonating with some motorists as the debate over Squeegee kids intensified last week with the leaks from parts of the preliminary plan.
We're going to pay them to get off of the corner, but we got people out here working every day, and we get money funded to the city all the time, but this is what we're going to waste it on.
But law enforcement expert Tyrone Powers believes that part of the plan could be key.
No one thinks that young people can grow up to be professional squeegee people. There's no job and career in squeegeeing long term.
Powers taking a more wait-and-see attitude towards the plan before condemning it.
If somehow they were getting paid and you were linking that to skills like welding, like infrastructure, things that they could use long term.
Young men have been washing windows for tips at Baltimore street corners for decades. Opponents call them a nuisance that must be removed from the streets, while supporters say the boys are simply working to make an honest dollar, needing help, not punishment. Well, for now, it's unclear if all of the leaked parts of the plan will be part of the final draft. Reporting tonight, Keith Daniels, Fox 45 News.
New tonight, Baltimore police are sharing these pictures of a man they say is a suspect in the shooting of a 13-year-old girl Monday night in East Baltimore. It happened along Fayette and Caroline Streets. The girl is fighting for her life at this time. Mayor Brandon Scott says he spoke with the mother, who's desperate for someone to come forward. These pictures are available to share at foxbaltimore.com. Baltimore police are confirming a double shooting happened along Madison Avenue in East Baltimore. Police say a 30-year-old woman was shot in her cheek and a 39-year-old man was shot in the body. Now, that man remains in critical condition. Anyone with information is asked to call Baltimore police. Well, Baltimore City Council members hosted a virtual town hall this evening asking questions about the proposed Johns Hopkins private police force and a memorandum of understanding between Johns Hopkins and Baltimore City Police.
I am very disappointed with Johns Hopkins' approach to the initiation and pending implementation of the JHPD. It has been far from transparent.
Multiplying the sheer number of special police departments in a city like Baltimore makes it much harder for residents and local representatives, to achieve meaningful police accountability.
Well, tonight's meeting comes after Johns Hopkins University's own town halls resulted in protests. Those in favor of a campus police say they believe it will make things safer. Last week, Hopkins issued a warning to students and staff at its Homewood and Peabody campuses about an increase in crime. The university outlined steps being taken to address the issue and mentioned the upcoming launch of its police department. Well, Tuesday was an election night full of firsts in the state of Maryland, headlined by the election of the next governor, Democrat Wes Moore. Moore becomes the first black governor in Maryland history and only the third in U.S. history. He defeated Republican Dan Cox by more than 20 points and says his message is staying consistent with what he said through the campaign.
I have campaigned very aggressively over the past year and a half all around the state, and I'm saying the same thing everywhere. You cannot have a thriving Maryland if you do not have a thriving Baltimore, period.
Well, in terms of crime in Baltimore, Morris says that he'll work closely with local leaders and new City State's Attorney Ivan Bates to determine the city's crime reduction strategy. This afternoon, Republican Dan Cox called Moore to concede the election. He also issued a statement thanking former President Trump for his support.
Well, Wes Moore is not the only one making history. Democrat Anthony Brown becomes Maryland's first black attorney general, defeating Republican Michael Peruka. Brooke Learman is the first woman to win statewide office in Maryland, defeating Barry Glassman in the comptroller race. She says this year's results show Marylanders were ready to elect bold, innovative leaders. Voters in Baltimore City made their voices clear on several key measures, including Question K. It establishes 8-year term limits for several elected leaders in the city. In response, the city council is moving forward with a bill that would cut lifetime pension requirements from 12 years to 8. Question I also passed, creating an independent oversight board for the city's inspector general. Instead of politicians overseeing the IG, the board will be made up by people from the city.
We're tracking some wicked weather that could actually have some impacts on us. It's tropical weather, and it's hard to believe with the temperatures today that we saw 58 degrees in the sun. But we are tracking Nicole now, a Category 1 hurricane, making the push just right around the Palm Bay area, just north of the Palm Beaches and along the Treasure Coast of Florida. Looks like it makes a landfall late tonight into early tomorrow as a Category 1 hurricane, the first November hurricane landfall in the United States since Kate back in 1985 on the Florida Gulf Coast. Is a 100-mile-an-hour hurricane back then. This then makes the move north and then northeast and diminishes as a remnant low over the Appalachians. But the moisture from this transports toward us, and take a look how much we may see. By midday Saturday, early afternoon Saturday, could see up to an inch, maybe 2 inches of rain in spots. I'm going to be tracking that and letting you know the other threats you're going to be dealing with Friday into the weekend out of this, my Weather Authority forecast.
Jonathan, thank you. Still ahead, a renewed push for a weekly recycling pickup in Baltimore, and why the Department of Public Works and City Council don't agree on the source of the problem. And weed wins. Maryland's next steps after voting to legalize recreational marijuana. There was a renewed push today for weekly recycling pickup nearly a year after Baltimore City went to its bi-weekly system. Now, the Department of Public Works, for its part, cites an ongoing worker shortage, with many of their workers becoming CDL drivers for better pay. DPW Director Jason Mitchell says the agency's current pay scale is a work in progress. City Councilman Yitchi Schleifer says Mitchell should start from the top.
But what we're seeing is that the money is going to people in the executive and higher level positions are making way more than they need to be making. And the workers who are actually physically doing the work are being underpaid.
Well, Schleifer says the problem also stems from a lack of leadership. The Department of Public Works hasn't hired a head of solid waste in more than a year. To help combat the reduction in recycling collections, DPW has opened a new drop-off location in Northwest Baltimore. Recreational marijuana is in Maryland's future after voters decided to legalize it. Adults 21 years of age and older will be able to possess, grow, and smoke their own herb with possession restrictions of 1.5 ounces. Now, the law officially goes into effect July 1st of 2023, but many in Maryland are already looking at the positives.
If you look at a state like Colorado that has basically the same population as Maryland, they're bringing in $400 million a year in tax revenue from the sales of marijuana products. So this really could be a opportunity for Maryland to raise money without raising taxes.
And this is going to be a nice journey for everybody, and those referrals are going to keep coming our way.
Well, lawmakers also passed a companion bill earlier this year that would automatically expunge all cases in which possession of cannabis was the only charge. President Biden takes the podium for the first time since the midterm election. His thoughts on the results so far and his promise to Republican lawmakers.
And the bus stop forecast into tomorrow. Another quiet day, although clouds will gradually be increasing. Drop-off time at the bus stop, we're at 43:56 at lunch. And for after school, looks like we're right close to 60 or so. But the clouds, again, coming in ahead of the remnants of Nicole. I'm going to let you know when the weather's going to be worse for your traveling to work. That's coming up in my Weather Authority forecast.
There were Democratic victories in a pair of key county executive races. In Baltimore County, incumbent Johnny Olszewski held on to defeat Republican Pat McDonough. A similar margin in Howard County as Calvin Ball took 57% of the vote against Alan Kittleman in a rematch. But in Anne Arundel County, Democratic incumbent Stuart Pittman currently trails Republican Jessica Hare. The 11,000 vote lead is not a decisive margin, according to voting officials. Pittman says he is proud of the campaign he's run so far.
We raised the bar for what public service means in this county, and people noticed that. And it was a grassroots campaign. We had way less money last time than the opponent, and this time, actually, I've had a whole lot less money than my opponent this time. But it's been a grassroots campaign of people who mobilized because that's how we governed.
Well, Anne Arundel County is not opening mail-in ballots until tomorrow. More than 45,000 ballots have been received so far, and most of those mail-in ballots belong to Democrats. Voting officials say it's enough to change the outcome if party lines are held. There are 25,000 ballots. It could be days before the winner is known. Well, the balance of power is still up for grabs in both the House and Senate of Congress. This is President Biden is calling election night a strong result for Democrats, as some experts predicted a red wave. Republicans could still end up with control of the House and Senate, but President Biden says he'll be eager to reach across the aisle to work with Congress.
Regardless of what the final tally in these elections show, and there's still some counting going on, I'm prepared to work with my Republican colleagues. The American people have made clear, I think, that they expect Republicans to be prepared to work with me as well.
Well, the president says his compromises won't extend to cutting social programs or a national ban on abortion. Georgia's Senate race won't be decided until next month. Neither incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock or Republican challenger Herschel Walker earned the 50% threshold Georgia requires, meaning there will be a runoff December 6th. Arizona and Nevada's Senate races are also too close to call at this time. There's going to be a new kid on the block in Washington, D.C., so to speak. The first U.S. congressman from Gen Z, 25-year-old Maxwell Frost, was elected in Florida's 10th congressional district. Now, much of his campaign focused on gun violence and fighting the NRA. Frost vows to work on passing universal background checks for people buying guns. Nicole officially declared a hurricane this evening. We go live to Stuart, Florida, near West Palm Beach, as the storm makes its way toward the coast. Lena Salzbank from our Sinclair sister station in West Palm has an update.
Here in Jensen Beach, Florida, we are patiently waiting Hurricane Nicole's arrival. Those wind gusts really picking up within the last few hours. The waves really coming on shore. As you can see, they're creeping up on the roadway. Some people have decided to not heed the warnings of officials. And we know this is not Hurricane Ian's strength, but hurricanes in a Category 1 can still cause a lot of damage. The winds here are really picking up right now as we're doing this report. We know now that Hurricane Nicole is less than 100 miles from the east coast of Florida. Those effects being felt very quickly and very suddenly within the last few hours. Reporting on Jensen Beach, I'm Victoria DeCardenas. Back to you.
All right, meteorologist Jonathan Myers here, Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Myers. Jonathan, we're at the end of hurricane season. We don't have the same heat in the atmosphere. Does that make a difference in terms of the strength of the hurricane and its fuel?
Absolutely. We have a lot more wind shear, a lot more systems dipping south across the country that kind of shear apart these storms.
Sure.
So it's not that calm atmosphere that these storms really need to kind of build up and build their thunderstorms. And we also, yes, as you mentioned, do not have that sea surface temperature that we have in August and September. We're starting to go on kind of the end of things. We almost made it out of the season without another hurricane making it to the East Coast and making it to the United States. But here we go. One last one. Hopefully this is it. The last time we had a hurricane hit in November on the United States coastline, anywhere in the United States, was back in 1985. And it just happened to be the area, if you remember, Hurricane Michael, Mexico Beach. It happened to be that area that got hit by a hurricane, Hurricane Kate, which was a Category 1/Category 2 with 100-mile-an-hour winds. This one has 75-mile-an-hour winds, but still, Nicole, it's got rain, it's got wind, and it's going to have some impacts potentially here as remnants. Friday into early Saturday is our best chance of seeing some of that. There is a low-end severe risk with the track that the remnants are going to take. We're going to be on the eastern side of this. An inch or two of rain, so we won't be on the heaviest rain side. Actually, the western portion of the storm is going to have the heavy rain out toward Pittsburgh and western New York, and there will be some gusty breezes as well. So we're tracking this hour by hour as it makes the move ever closer to the Palm Beaches and the Treasure Coast of Florida. Some pretty impressive pictures of some of the beach erosion coming out here. Some houses almost going down into the water, into the ocean, where we've seen portions of seawalls being collapsed here along the Treasure Coast of Central Florida. Lots of hurricane warnings, tropical storm warnings, storm surge warnings. Still quietude up here in Baltimore and the mid-Atlantic coast as we remain under fair weather high pressure. But the storm, it's in sight. And this is going to start making a turn as it goes under the impacts of this cold front that's now way out west around Denver, Colorado. That storm system actually put down 1 to 3 feet of snow in the Sierras of California and flooding rains that, well, they needed some of the rain, maybe not flooding, but they did need some of the wetness. And now it's going to pick this storm up after it makes landfall as a Category 1 likely tonight just north of the Palm Beaches once again here in Florida, and shove it northbound. You can see the heavy rain on the northwestern side of the track and on the eastern side of the track, maybe up to about 1 inch or 2 of rain, and that would be Friday into Saturday. But again, also that severe risk on the eastern side of the storm where we have more instability and more humidity that kind of gets drawn in on southerly winds. It's a 1 out of 5 risk of severe weather. So it's not a huge risk, but there could be some damaging winds and maybe a spin-up tornado out of any thunderstorms if they do form. It's a low risk, but still it's there. 43 right now. So we're still in the crisp air on the East Coast. And then we get to warmth. We are going to warm up tomorrow as well as at the end of the week as the storm comes through, and then the bottom just falls out. And beyond this, we are going to see some chillier air. Overnight into tomorrow, again, the clouds gradually increase. I think these temperatures are a little underdone. We'll probably be in the mid to upper 60s tomorrow. And then working our way into Friday, there's that on and off rain. Some of the yellows, the oranges, the reds, some of those storms that could be mixed in there as well. Maybe some of the stronger ones, too. 42, mostly clear skies for tonight. Umbrellas and rain gear out here Friday into early Saturday. It's all out by Saturday afternoon with just a spot shower left over. And look at that big chill. End of the weekend and next week.
All right, Jonathan, thank you. Here's a look at tomorrow's headlines. Mayor Brandon Scott is expected to release the Squeegee Collaborative Plan. Baltimore City Council is holding a hearing with city school leaders to discuss performance in city schools. The school system currently faces a lawsuit over misuse of taxpayer dollars. And a new movie theater is opening along President Street in Harbor East, actually a renovated one. The first showing will be tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. This is the former Landmark Theater. We can't wait to have this reopened in Baltimore. Back in a moment. Here's a look at today's top trending stories. Number one, inflation concerns are on the top of minds of voters, but those concerns don't seem to extend to the slot machine or blackjack table. U.S. casinos reported record revenue in October, including in Maryland. Casinos generated more than $210 million, beating the previous single-month revenue by $31 million. Number two, you may have seen some of Maryland's famous landmarks looking a little different this week. In fact, here's a look at M&T Bank Stadium, lit up in green, and it's all part of Operation Greenlight to celebrate Veterans Day this week. The University of Maryland Medical System is also illuminating all of its hospitals in green, and Governor Hogan says the initiative supports military and raises awareness about Veterans Affairs. Well, the Ravens defense stood tall Monday night against the Saints, and they did it without their biggest offseason acquisition. How close he is to making a return. That's all for us on the late edition. Thank you for watching. I'm Kai Jackson. Here's Rocco DeSangra with Sports Unlimited. Rocco.
What's going on, Kai? Whiskey, wine, cheddar cheese, they all get better with age. Well, evidently,
absolutely.
So does Justin Houston. Despite missing 3 games with a groin injury, the 33-year-old, he's playing at an elite level. For his Monday night performance against the Saints, Houston has been named AFC Defensive Player of the Week. The veteran outside linebacker registered an interception and 2.5 sacks. And in doing so, he became the first Raven to ever record 3 straight multiple sack games. Houston even contemplated retirement in the offseason. John Harbaugh, so happy that he didn't follow through.
You know, Justin he's having a great year at this stage of his career. And to me, it's a credit to him in so many ways, but it's a credit to him in the sense that he really worked hard. I mean, you know, as you get older, one thing I learned watching the Ed Reeds, Ray Lewis's, Terrell Suggses, those guys, Halotys, when you get a little bit older, you got to work that much harder, you know, just to stay the same, you know, just to be able to play, to stay healthy, and to be able to perform. And he did that. He really put the work in. He's in just he might tell you the best shape of his career. I don't know, but he's in great shape.
Houston has been playing at such a high level. The Ravens just added Roquan Smith. The defense is looking really good, and that's without their biggest offseason acquisition. Safety Marcus Williams, he's still working his way back from a dislocated wrist that he suffered October 9th. Williams had 3 picks through 5 games before he got hurt, and the hope is that he'll be back on the field next month.
He's looking good. You know, it's just one of those deals where it's a bone that has to heal. So it's pretty straightforward, as long as there's no setbacks, so to speak. There have been no setbacks so far, and I think it's sometime in December is when they expect him back, and we'll see. But so far, so good.
MLB's offseason is just getting started, and the O's have already made a few moves. Declining Jordan Lyles' $11 million option for 2023. That means the 32-year-old pitcher will become a free agent. But that doesn't mean he won't be back in Baltimore next season. The team also claimed outfielder Daz Cameron off waivers. In other MLB news, World Series champion Trey Mancini, he's a familiar face. He's now a free agent after his option was not picked up by the Houston Astros. Mancini was a fan favorite here in Baltimore, playing for the club from 2016 to 2019, battling and beating cancer, resuming his career in 2021, and winning the AL Comeback Player of the Year. Could a return to Baltimore be possible? Just have to wait and see. The DMV is a hotbed for talent, and that's not really a secret. Kevin Willard landed 3 from the DMV in the 2023 recruiting class, including a player with local ties. St. Francis Academy's Jonathan Lamoth is headed to College Park. He's the number 3 player in the entire state of Maryland. Willard signed 2 other DMV guys as well, bringing in Deshaun Harris-Smith and Jamie Kaiser. Maryland back in action tomorrow against Western Carolina. How about the Maryland women's basketball team? Brenda Fries and the Maryland women's basketball team signed 5 in the class of 2023. Amaya Reynolds, Emily Fisher, Hawa Dumboya, Summer Bostic, and Maryland native Riley Nelson. Those 5 players, they give Fries and her staff the number 7 class in the country. The Terps play host to number 1 South Carolina Friday night. That is a big one. That's it for this edition of Sports Unlimited. I'm Rocco DeSangro. Thanks for watching, and have a great night.